Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a workshop entitled How to Plan and Pay for Alzheimer's Care. We are so happy that you've joined us today, and we're excited to provide you with exclusive information and resources that will give you a deeper understanding of us and our services. My name is Emily, and I'm the Marketing Director for Clinkscale's Elder Law Practice. We have our main office located in Hayes and our other office in Wichita, and we serve clients and families throughout the entire state of Kansas. We're able to connect through in-person meetings, phone calls, and also lots of Zoom computer meetings as well. I would like to invite you all to ask any questions that you have in the chat box that's located at the bottom of your screen, and Randy will address any of those questions or concerns that you do have. But without any further ado this morning, I'd like to go ahead and hand it over to our attorney and president, Randy Clinkscales, to get us started.
Good morning, everyone. Emily, thank you. I'm pleased to get to do this presentation on how to plan and pay for Alzheimer's care. Our office attended the Alzheimer's meeting in Wichita a few months ago, and a couple of us were presenters. And I know we just went through the longest day here a while back, and so I really thought this was a good time to do this workshop on how to plan and pay for Alzheimer's care. Before we get started, let me just ask Emily, I want to just check if all of you can hear me, would you just type Y in the chat box? And let's just make sure everybody can hear us, Emily.
I do see a few Ys coming through.
Okay. So let's get started. The slides to work. Let's talk about what we do. I work with families who are currently facing a chronic illness such as Alzheimer's. We have trained professionals to help navigate the legal, financial, and health journey. That includes legal documents and care coordination, as well as working with the other aspects of getting a plan in place. The other part of our practice is establishing long-term estate plans that address the possibility of a future chronic illness that would include preservation of property and protection of beneficiaries. Today, you're going to discover ways to establish an effective plan that will address the possibilities that you or a loved one will develop Alzheimer's, and how to pay for care without losing what's important, and to stay at home and care for somebody with Alzheimer's. And so this might be important to you if you're concerned about one day developing Alzheimer's. I know that when I was doing my planning, part of that planning was what would happen if me or my wife developed Alzheimer's. It also would be for you if you're actually dealing with Alzheimer's, either for yourself or a friend or a loved one that you're caring for. If you don't have a plan in place right now that addresses the concern about Alzheimer's, then this is going to be helpful for you. Something that always comes up about Alzheimer's is how do you pay for care and how do you stay at home? So all of those issues we're going to address. And finally, this will really be helpful for you if you're a caregiver who's starting to get overwhelmed. When I talk with a client, one of the questions I ask them, when we always start off talking about what's going on healthcare-wise, and then we talk about their resources and what plan they have in place. Then I ask them, what is your goal? If you had a magic wand, what do you wish would happen? And typically it's that they would like to have a plan in place that will address the unique issues of Alzheimer's, to be able to pay for care without losing everything, knowing that their property and their income is going to be protected for their spouse and their children or others. If they're caring for someone at home, how do we increase those odds that they can continue to do that? And just to have the peace of mind that everything is going to be okay and that they're not alone. Just one of my early Alzheimer's cases. This is a testimonial from still a current client named Tad. When my wife was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I tried to care for her myself. My son, a doctor, told me to get help or we would end up with two sick people. My banker recommended Clink scales, and Clink scales helped me care for myself and my wife. They helped monitor my care and my wife's care. If I ever had a question, I just had to pick up the phone. So who am I? I'm an elder care attorney. Many of you may already know me, but I hope today many of you will know a lot more about me. We have offices in Hayes and Wichita. We have 4 attorneys. I am an elder care attorney, which means that I really focus on care issues with my client versus maybe sometimes you hear about elder law attorneys that all they do is get you on Medicaid, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that we want to have a relationship with our client that goes beyond that. So I really focus on people with aging and chronic care issues, and then protection of assets from long-term care costs. I've been practicing now, actually this is my 44th year, but the last 18 years have really been the best. It's because I transitioned over to elder care. Prior to that, I was an estate planning lawyer, also did divorces. I did a very general practice in Hayes. But when I refocused because of my change in my life, that made me refocus my practice. And that change was when I took over my grandmother's care. And many of you know that story, and I won't attempt to go through that again. But what I learned from my grandmother is how important it was for her to be independent. She wanted to stay out of the nursing home as long as possible. And she wanted me to help her preserve her assets to maintain the lifestyle that she wanted, which is a very modest lifestyle. But what I learned along the way was how important it was that I, as my grandmother's caregiver, had some assistance. And even though I was a lawyer, that did not mean that I knew everything at all. And so I had a care coordinator that worked with me and my grandmother along that journey. And just I want to talk to you a little bit about my journey into why is Alzheimer's important to me. Just to let you know, in my office, about 70% of our clients, what we call life care plan clients, have dementia. It's the most costly disease, more than cancer. It has very high caregiver burnout. It is probably the most complex in terms of caregiving. Wanted to share with you how I really got interested in Alzheimer's. It actually goes way, way back when I was a little kid. My grandmother that you saw the picture of here a moment ago, go back. This is my grandmother. When she got married when she was 17, and when she was 18, her mother, Tommy, and her mother, Tommy, became a widow when my grandmother's father died. And my grandmother, Thelma, took in her grandmother, Tommy, when my grandmother was only 18. Tommy lived with my grandmother virtually the rest of her life until she transitioned to a nursing home. But let me tell you what happened. My grandmother had 2 children, Billy Mack and Buddy. Both of them were born hemophiliacs. Buddy died when he was 8 years old in a playground accident, something that was not very bad, but because he was a hemophiliac, which means he's a bleeder, means he doesn't clot. like most of us will do. And he in a playground accident, he didn't catch a ball, and it hit him in the stomach. And a couple of days later, he died from bleeding internally. My grandmother had tremendous guilt about that. She had always been reluctant to even let him go to school. So Bill also was a hemophiliac. Bill was younger by several years. So let's go to Tommy. When Tommy was in her late 50s, early 60s, there was a change. And my grandmother, in retrospect, called it old-timers disease. But Tommy got very aggressive. And I know that at one point that I remember this incident as a little kid. Tommy threw something at Bill, my uncle. And it really scared my grandmother. And we were seeing this pattern, or she was seeing this pattern, that Tommy was putting Bill at risk and was not herself anymore. And so my grandmother had to make a decision to put Tommy into a nursing home. And the nursing home was about 50 miles away in Hillsboro, Texas. And my grandmother lived in Fort Worth at that time. And it was not a nice place. And I remember my grandmother, when I was go to visit, and when it was Sunday, she would dress up and go visit Tommy. And of course, Tommy continued to deteriorate, and there was certainly a point where she did not even remember my grandmother. Years later, my grandmother still felt guilty about her decision to have to place Tommy, and the difficulty in seeing Tommy slip out from understanding, not recognizing my grandmother anymore. It was a very, very tough decision, and it was an awful journey. I wish that I could go back to that time and could help my grandmother more. But it really laid the groundwork for me on why dealing with Alzheimer's can be a difficult journey if we're not prepared. And certainly we're much more prepared today, or we can be much more prepared today than we were back 60 years ago. I was fortunate that I got to serve on Governor Kelly's task force. I'm going to get into some statistics there. I was really amazed. We had a lot of healthcare professionals on there. We had law enforcement on there. I was really amazed at how little they knew about what was going on in small towns like Hayes, and the struggles that we were having finding care and finding medical services and the like for people dealing with dementia. Let me before I go on, just we're talking about Alzheimer's, but Alzheimer's is a form of dementia, and so we have clients that have multiple types of dementia, but Alzheimer's is certainly the most prevalent one. So in my office, in dealing with clients with Alzheimer's, concerns that they have, the family's concerns that they're going to lose everything. They're dealing with guilt about asking for help. There's a family burden. Sometimes we run into something called the promise. I promise I will never put you in a nursing home. And so sometimes we have to work through that with people. Let me give you some statistics. And again, some of these came out of my time on the task force. As of 2020, 55,000 Kansans 65 and above had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. By 2025, that's next year, that number will grow to 62,000 Kansans. Right now, as in 2020 and in 2020, someone is diagnosed with with dementia, with Alzheimer's every 65 seconds. By 2050, it'll be every 33 seconds. It is in Kansas, it is the sixth leading cause of death and kills more than breast cancer and prostate cancer combined. Nationally, 1 out of every 8 Americans over the age of 65 has dementia. 1 out of every 2 Americans over 85 is dealing with dementia of some type. As of 2024, as of right now, the cost of care is reaching $10,000 plus per month. We have a local facility here. That's what they're charging per month here in Hayes. Just another testimonial. This is from another family we worked with dealing with dementia. We set up a plan for her. What Randy did for our family was create a life care plan for my mom with the goal of keeping her safe and protecting as many of their assets as he could. We used their social services expertise, legal services, and all the other services that came with the plan. You can read this. The plan paid for itself 100 times over. I'm convinced my father would not have had his house and the small farm he grew up on, but for the plan. And by the way, if you want these slides, just let us know. We're happy to send them through to you. So a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia does not have to devastate your family or your finances. So let's talk about what you're going to discover today. You'll discover the planning you need to do before you or a loved one develops Alzheimer's. And if already diagnosed, the legal documents you need to get in place. You're going to discover ways to pay for care without losing what's most important to you. And then we're also going to talk about how to increase the odds of staying at home. So number one, the legal planning for Alzheimer's. This is always kind of interesting to me. People presume that because I'm married, I can make decisions for my wife. Kansas is one of the 4 states where that's not true. So I have to give her power to do that through some type of document. So if I don't have that, then what happens is then someone else is going to make that decision, and that's going to be dictated by the law. So when I say either you decide or someone else will, that's what I'm talking about. And you can say who has the power to act on your behalf. No one has automatic power. Again, my wife doesn't have automatic power to act on my behalf. You need to express your wishes. You need to figure out what your wishes are and then put them in the documents. There are essential documents your essential documents decide what can be done for you. So let me emphasize that last phrase. Your essential documents decide what can be done for you. If you have a poorly drawn power of attorney, as an example, and you have lost capacity, the ability to help you is defined by the contents of that document. And so a poorly drafted power of attorney, and let me kind of be careful here, because a power of attorney that was drafted for you when you were 20 is not necessarily going to be the type of power of attorney that you want when you're 60, because life changes, the laws change, but more especially life changes, and what your goals are much different when you're 60 or 70 or 80 or 90 than they are when you were 20. And I have to sometimes get that difficult getting that through people's heads. The power of attorney that I do for my son when he is 35 years old is different than the power of attorney he's going to want when he's 65. It's not a criticism of my power of attorney. It's just the goals are different and what we want to have happen is different. So your investment in planning may save your family thousands of dollars and also avoid us having to go to court. So let's talk about the key documents, and I'm going to go through some of them, but some of them I'm going to integrate into some other stuff I'm going to talk to you about. So one key document is the healthcare and financial power of attorney, HIPAA release, be sure assets are titled correctly. The beneficiary designation is in accordance with the plan, either a will or a trust, and then also consider asset protection tools. That would include irrevocable trust, long-term care insurance, life insurance, the long-term care rider, different things like that. So let's talk about a healthcare and durable power of attorney. Again, I always want those to be two separate documents because if one should be revoked, it's going to end up revoking both if they're all in one document. So a healthcare power of attorney is who has the ability to act on to make healthcare decisions for you when you cannot. You want to be sure that you have an agent that's going to follow your wishes. And just example I always use is that I did my healthcare power of attorney and named my oldest son, and then he read it and said, "Dad, I can't do this." And so that's fine. He said, "I just can't pull the plug." And so I talked with my middle son, and he was comfortable pulling the plug. But again, you want to have someone that's comfortable making those decisions, they're comfortable following your wishes. And it's important in your healthcare power of attorney that your wishes are in there. What's your definition of quality of life? What about if you have dementia? I have very strong language in my power of attorney about if I don't have a quality of life or if I have dementia to the point that I don't recognize my family, I cut off extraordinary health measures. It's my wish. It's not the right answer. It's my wish. But those healthcare power of attorneys can really be customized to fit what you want. Talk about financial power of attorney. Again, on both powers of attorneys, you want an agent that you feel is capable and trustworthy, and you want a backup. On the financial power of attorney, I like to require that the agent provide an accounting. Again, the power of attorney may include asset protection, including gifting. There are actually 14 alternative powers that you can put into the power of attorney. They're not good powers, they're not bad powers, they're just alternatives. And typically, as my client gets older, we're trying to expand those powers of attorney as much as possible because we may be trying to pay for care or protect assets, and we need to get that done through the power of attorney in case our client loses capacity. Next one, central document that I have is a will or a trust. I heard this as recently as last week. If I have a will, then I don't need to go to probate. That is the opposite of what is true. If you have a will, for it to be valid, two things have to happen. One, you have to die. Secondly, you then somebody has to take that will to court and go through a probate process. That requires some time and expense. I mean, it just does. And it's only going to deal with probatable property. And what I mean by that is if I leave my vehicle in my will to all three of my boys, but I have one boy on there as a transfer on death on the title to the vehicle, it doesn't matter what the will says. It's going to pass automatically to my son. So, and we're going to kind of get in that in a minute. The other alternative, which I use primarily, is a revocable trust. In 2008, my wife and I set up our revocable trust. She and I are the trustees. It's effective as soon as we set it up, provided we start putting our stuff in it. Then we have backup trustees, and who's going to act for us if we cannot act? When both my wife and I die, there's not going to be a probate. My oldest son is the trustee. We have put into the trust contingencies. So if something happens to Josh or Ben or Dan, I've got some grandkids, if there's a divorce, if somebody becomes disabled, all of that stuff we have addressed inside that trust. But understand, it does not protect the property that's in that trust from my long-term care. It's not intended to. Because it's a revocable trust, it cannot do that. The other thing that we would want to think about is asset protection tools. So what are we talking about here? Is how are we going to pay for care if we were to get sick? One method is self-funding care, setting aside a resource. So I will share with you, in my case, I had some long-term care insurance. It's not enough. When I bought it, it was enough. But long-term care has grown so fast. Long-term care costs have gone up so fast. When I did my long-term care insurance, long-term care costs were almost $200 a day. Now they're north of $300 a day. I have set aside funds. What I've done is I've got an IRA that I have told my wife, feel comfortable. She has her own IRA. You can use that IRA to help pay for my care. Another tool, asset protection tool, is long-term care insurance. I could talk for a couple hours about this, but it'd be very boring. And we don't have time. There's the traditional long-term care where you pay monthly or quarterly or annually for a certain benefit. There are premiums. The bad thing about it is that those premiums can go up, and they have in the last few years greatly. Another alternative is a hybrid policy. That's actually a life insurance policy with a long-term care rider. And then if you have a long-term care claim, it just reduces the death benefit. Again, my concern is always about sufficiency of coverage. Another alternative that we utilize is irrevocable trust. It provides protection for a particular asset. So I visited with a gentleman last week. He's got his home and some acreage that's important to him that he wants to pass on to his family. And so we're going to place that into an irrevocable trust and keep all this other stuff outside that to be sure that he can take care of himself. With an irrevocable trust, you still possess the property, you get the income, but not the principal. And someone beside yourself is the trustee. Also, keeping in mind, if you ever apply for Medicaid, there's a 5-year look back, which means you cannot apply for Medicaid for 5 years from the time that trust is set up. I know I'm kind of getting into the weeds there a little bit, but I do want you to know that's a really good. So typically, what we're going to do is a combination of all of these tools, not just one tool. And so that's why it gets a little bit, now, it may be we don't do long-term care insurance, but we set aside resources in an irrevocable trust. It's according to what's right for that family, given their financial circumstances. And then finally, I want to talk to you about asset titling in a beneficiary designation. This is so important. I mean, I can draft the greatest plan in the world, but if we don't fund it, if you don't fund it, if you don't set ownership up correctly, if you don't do beneficiaries correctly, it doesn't matter what the plan says. Because the way you have property titled, the way you have beneficiary designation overrides all other wishes. And so it could really mess up your plan. It's become more complicated with retirement tools, with retirement funds, particularly if something were to happen to a beneficiary. So many times we call it funding of your plan is the most important part of planning. So whether you're doing a will or a trust or beneficiary designation, that's all that's all part of your plan. And it's real important that, you know, at the end of the day, somebody steps back and looks at this and says, if Randy dies today, this is what's going to happen. I will tell you that I have one of my partners look over my beneficiary designations and how stuff is titled for me once a year. I don't think I'll screw it up, but I want to be sure that somebody besides myself is looking at it. As they say, a client, a lawyer who represents themselves as a fool for a client. So I want another attorney in my office to look at my plan to be sure that I'm not glossing over something. So here's an example of a poor document. So Betty is the person who contacted our office. She is the daughter of Mrs. Jackson. There are two daughters. The other daughter is disabled. Mrs. Jackson has had dementia for many years, but she'd been able to stay at home. This is in Southeast Kansas. Then she had a hospital stay, and the hospital said this lady cannot be returned home. So Betty is now in control of her mom's affair. She discovered that, well, she actually got a power of attorney that was very, very limited. Again, I don't think they had the right conversation about what potentially could happen. Typically in these kind of cases, Betty, Mrs. Jackson is going to end up going on Medicaid. There are look-back rules, but there's an exception that would allow us to transfer the home to the disabled daughter, so the disabled daughter has a place to live. But because of the limited power of attorney, we could not do that. Now, I would tell you, we kind of did a workaround and we were able to save about half the money. But again, the family waited too long to take action. If we'd had a good power of attorney, the home could have been saved. I could go make a list of 50 different things that are important, and that we have to have a good power of attorney to get those things done. The list is almost it can kind of go on forever. Here's a story that I enjoyed. I actually am going to use this story twice. So the Lundgrens came to me. He had been diagnosed with early signs of dementia. Actually, he picked up on it himself. And he's in his early 60s, a very active farmer, has a large farming operation, fairly large. His comment to me was, I want to stay in control, but I want to be sure my wife and my land are protected. So what we did in that case, so again, he's still farming. I feel like the window is pretty big for him. So what we did is we put his land into an irrevocable trust. We set up very broad powers of attorney. We actually met with him several times to carve out his healthcare power of attorney so that his agent, which is his wife and then his kids, would all be on board with what we're doing. So even though it's going to be several years before he ever needs health assistance, Mr. Lundgren's goals are protected in that his land is protected. He remains in control. His wife has power to further protect resources, and his care goals were protected. And it takes a lot of pressure and guilt off his family when a time comes that he can no longer make decisions. Then how do we pay for Alzheimer's care? First thing is, I'd like for you to decide, and we can talk to you about one of the options. I would rather you decide than some family member trying to guess what you want. You don't have to go broke if you need dementia care, and there are ways to use government benefits to pay for care, such as Medicare, VA, and Medicaid. Let me just real quickly, this is a family that actually, the children made the appointment. Their parents had bought some long-term care insurance, and I think it only paid about $3,200 a month. And this was several years back. But their parents were had a lot of buyer's remorse, if you will. So in this particular case, they had, between the two of them, about $500,000 in IRAs. So what we did was we took $150,000 out of one of their IRAs and assisted them in buying a life insurance policy that pays $250,000. It's a one-time premium. The way the law is set up, we could do this without owing any taxes. But the life insurance policy had a long-term care rider that pays about $7,000 a month for 5 years. Again, this is an old story, but that was good coverage for at the time we did it. The big thing is there's no annual premiums. If there is a claim on the long-term care rider, all it does is reduces the death benefit of the life insurance policy. So in theory, if they don't ever have a claim, the family's going to get $250,000 tax-free. If they do have a claim, it's going to be $250,000 minus whatever benefits were paid out. Versus my long-term care, if I don't use it, I lose it. Let's do another example. And again, the resource that this family had was Medicare and long-term care insurance. And they were about to make a mistake. Mr. Johnson had had a stroke with resultant dementia. And they were about to discharge him at the request of Mrs. Johnson to a local nursing home that was not a skilled care facility. We worked with them and showed them that if we discharged him to a skilled facility, Medicare would pay for this care and the rehabilitation. And we also were able to tap into the long-term care insurance policy to make some home improvements and also to provide for some home care. The result was that Mr. Johnson stayed in the facility for a period of time, but then was well enough to go home with some assistance. And so he got Medicare benefits extended. We got health improvement that he needed, and he was able to return home. And we ended up not using up the long-term care policy and protecting assets. Another one is the Killingsworths. Their goal, they contacted me as they wanted to protect their family. nothing's going on in terms of health issues. They're in their late 50s. They have some assets. They've got a home quarter. They had invested in another quarter with some value. The point is that that investment property is not very important to them, other than as an investment. They have some IRAs and investment in cash, but not a lot. They have a family business, and both children work in the business. So their goals was to keep the business and the home quarter for the children. So we've got some time. So in this particular case, but we don't have a lot of cash resources, and they were really not excited about long-term care insurance. So what we did for them is we set aside the investment quarter, just said it's there. If we need to sell it, fine, it'll pay for our care. We protected the home with an irrevocable trust. We set up a limited liability company for the business and began transferring an interest in the business to the kids over time. And again, this is the same Lundgren story, but again, the plan there was by using the irrevocable trust, we were able to assure Mr. Lundgren at least the land would not be lost. And so again, it's just that peace of mind, knowing that, and the kids will still get a step up in basis, still a lot of tax benefits to the plan. So let me talk about one using Medicaid, and don't get hung up on the numbers here, but I do think it's important that you realize whether you've got a lot of money or little money, there are things that need to be done. So Mrs. Goforth has a type of dementia called Lewy bodies dementia. It's a really aggressive form. She's been discharged to a nursing home from the hospital, and she, at this time, was paying $8,000 a month. Mr. Goforth has a retirement plan. They have a joint account of $60,000. He has Social Security income of $1,500, and she has Social Security income of $800. They were told by the nursing home that they would need to spend down all their resources before Medicaid would help. He would need to use his income to help pay for her care, and Medicaid would put a lien on the home. And Mr. Goforth was worried that his wife would not get good care if she went on Medicaid. So using some Medicaid tools and legal documents, we were able to restructure their assets. We were able to qualify Mrs. Goforth for Medicaid. Mr. Goforth was able to keep all of the assets, all of his income, and Mrs. Goforth's income to support himself. The result was he was not forced to go broke. He had enough money to take care of himself. He had enough money to take care of himself. Even if Mrs. Goforth passed away, he could enjoy his retirement. There's no lien on the home, and he can sell it without losing it to Medicaid. And we monitored his wife's care and advocated for her, giving peace of mind to Mr. Goforth. Just want to throw in, if Mr. and Mrs. Goforth were wartime veterans, the VA may have been able to pay up to $2,200 a month tax-free to them as part of the plan. So just some comments about Medicaid. There are hundreds of rules, policies, and memos. In my mind, they're all trapped. So big picture that I want you to know is when we're looking at Medicaid, how do you protect your spouse and children by maximizing proper transfers? There is a 5-year look back on all transfers, but there are some special exceptions. Look for ways to preserve what is important. This is important, plan to avoid Medicaid disqualifications. People do things that will disqualify them from Medicaid, and they don't intend to do that. plan to avoid liens, and plan to maximize income. Big takeaway, please do not rely on the internet or your coffee shop or the long-term care facility, or try to go it alone when trying to navigate Medicaid. Kind of understand there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of ulterior motives out there on what needs to be done. So just be very, very careful on where you're getting advice, and please just go to an elder care attorney. That's the bottom line. So number 3, how do we increase the odds of staying at home when dealing with Alzheimer's? And I think the first thing what I would say is express your wishes clearly in your documents as well as with your family. Fund your wishes. Your caregivers need to be equipped with tools. So I don't think I have this in here, but the other day I met with a family, and mom's got some dementia, but she's pretty cognitive, and she wants to stay at home, and she lives out in the country in a rural area. One of the things that I told her was I'm more than happy to support her goal, but we have to have a plan to make that happen. We have to be willing to fund and establish that plan. It's not fair to throw all of that burden on her children. They have their own lives, their own jobs, and so forth. They can be part of the plan, but let's don't make them exclusively. So how to stay at home. It's the most important goal for many families, such as the lady last week. There are options. It's not your home versus a nursing home. The first step is accepting assistance, and support for the caregiver is essential. So this is the promise, which is kind of interesting. Mr. and Mrs. Smith came in to see us. Their daughter Alice came in. He's been diagnosed with dementia and is still in the home. He's a ways down the journey. During our meeting, there were arguments with Mr. Smith about, remember, Dad, we've gone over this, or Dad, we've said this several times, that sort of thing. He's in the meeting because he can no longer be left alone. He has sundowners, which means he gets very aggravated, active as toward the evening as the sun goes down. As a result, Mrs. Smith is not sleeping well. Her solution was to quit her job and her sorority. Alice lives many miles away, and Alice is one that made the appointment because she sees how much Mom is aging faster than Dad, and that's not uncommon. 60% of family caregivers die before the person they're caring for. The family wants to keep Mr. Smith at home, but their solution is Mrs. Smith providing all the care with Alice giving relief when she can, which is like once a month. So we began working with them, with our dementia trained coordinator, about getting Mrs. Smith back to work, finding respite care, using senior companions, and probably most importantly, giving Mrs. Smith some caregiver tips. It's interesting how much a better relationship that Mrs. Smith now has with Mr. Smith. As Alice said, your help saved Mom. It allowed us to keep Dad at home much longer, plus we saved thousands of dollars. How to care for and communicate with somebody with dementia. Most important, care for the caregiver. Tools for communicating, and you have to understand that you're in control. So let's talk about 5 ground rules to consider when working with a person with dementia. And I want you to know I stole this from Jill Wexler of my office, and she and the other care coordinators are really focused on dementia, but Jill does a great job. She started a support group. So I've always told her, if I get dementia, I want you to take care of me. So number one, we cannot change the person. It's a brain disorder that has shaped who they've become. We need to accommodate the behavior, do not try to control the behavior. You need to change your behavior or the physical environment. Number two, check with the physician first. Behaviors may have an underlying medical problem. For example, pain or experiencing adverse reactions to medication. One that we run into a lot, somebody may have dementia, but then develops a UTI, and then it really goes awful. And then once we get the UTI under control, we step back into a more manageable situation. Number three, behaviors have a purpose. Those living with dementia cannot tell us what they want or need. Always consider what the person is trying to meet with their behavior. When possible, accommodate that need. I really like this example. For example, they may take all of their clothes out of the closet daily, and we wonder why. They may just be fulfilling the need to stay busy and productive. Number four, behavior is triggered. All behaviors are triggered and occur for a reason. May not be rational, but there's a reason. The route to changing a behavior is disrupting the patterns that we create. As an example, try a different approach. Number five, and this is probably the most enlightening to me, what works today may not work tomorrow. The key to managing difficult behavior is being creative and flexible in your strategies. One size fits all does not apply to dementia. There will be good days and there will be bad days. So communication tips: don't argue, try to agree. Rather than reason, try to divert or change the subject. Try not to lecture, instead reassure. Avoid saying remember, instead reminisce. Don't say I told you, instead repeat or regroup. Don't say you can't, instead tell our loved ones he or she can. Try not to command or demand, instead ask or model behavior. Don't condescend, instead encourage or praise. Don't enforce, instead reinforce. And then here's my rule. Respect the person with dementia. Remember, they are in the room. Feelings can still be hurt. Levels of understanding vary from time to time. Don't talk as if they're not there. Sometimes we need to have private conversations without the person in the room, and that's okay. But while they're in the room, let's remember that their feelings can still be hurt. Outside help. Daycare, respite agencies. Remember to give family caregivers a break. Rotate care. Keep in mind a caregiver has their own family. The only reason I show this to you, this is my grandmother again, just to talk about how care can evolve. When I took over her care, she had 3 to 6 months to live. That went on for 10 years. During that period, we kept her in her home for 6 years. We then moved her to assisted living, where she stayed and enjoyed it for 4 years. And then she spent 50 days in the nursing home. So with proper guidance, you can stay at home longer. Your transitions can be gradual. Support for the caregiver is critical, and resources can be stretched to achieve your goals. This is another testimonial from Sherry. Her husband had Parkinson's and a lot of dementia. You helped me keep him at home as long as possible. You showed me how to be a better caregiver. I could not have figured out how to pay for Medicare and Medicaid on my own. What legal action do you need to do? If facing dementia, or if you're concerned about developing dementia, Meet with us for a strategy session. Don't wait. The longer you wait, the greater the crisis and the more limited the options. Act while capacity is not an issue. Express your goals in legal documents. Empower your agents and caregivers to carry out your goals. And don't give up. No matter where you are in the journey, there are solutions. What do you need to do if you're concerned about planning for or facing Alzheimer's or dementia? Again, schedule the strategy session. Let's explore funding resources, get in place strong powers of attorneys and other estate planning documents. Our goal is to find, get, and pay for good care without going broke. Last testimony I want to share with you is Pat. Pat's husband developed dementia. She actually moved to Kansas to be near family that she thought could help her. It didn't work out. When she came to us, she was very angry and frustrated at life. Let me just read what she says. My husband needed nursing home care. You guided me through the process. Your care coordinators made sure my husband was getting good care. I highly recommend you because you're always there for your clients and will guide them through everything that goes on. Things we never expected to go through. Most people are only going to make the dementia journey one time in their life, hopefully. It's something that we do every day, is help families go through that journey. So far you've discovered there are special specific documents that we need to get in place. There are ways to plan for possible care costs, and the plan will protect your spouse, your family, and your assets. There are ways to pay for care using private resources or government programs. With proper care and planning, you can delay or avoid the nursing home, allowing you to stay at home longer. In dealing with Alzheimer's, it's so important to care for and equip the caregiver, and it's important to have and use good communications tools. So I hope you get this one thing. No matter who you are, we all need expert planning for the possibility of being affected by Alzheimer's. And with the proper planning, we will not lose everything and can stay at home as long as possible. How do you make this happen? Schedule a strategy session with our office. We'll talk about the legal planning necessary because of Alzheimer's, so we can protect your assets and your wishes. We want to put a plan in place so that we can pay for care and express your wishes and put a plan in place that allows you to stay at home and also give tools to your caregivers. How does this work? We're going to start off with a short phone call with our office to be sure we can help you. And if we feel like we can, we'll tell you. If we feel like we can't, we'll send you to someone we feel like can help you. If we feel like we can, then we're going to schedule a 60 to 90-minute meeting in person or by Zoom or by telephone with me or one of our other 3 attorneys. At that meeting, we'll review your current estate plan. We'll discuss how to put a plan in place to protect you from the devastating effect of Alzheimer's. We'll discuss your financial and legal needs should your loved one require care. We'll establish with you long-term goals. If you're actually dealing with Alzheimer's, then I would like for you to visit with one of our care coordinators so I get a better handle on where you are in the journey. At the end of our time together, you'll have an understanding of the Alzheimer's journey and what steps need to be implemented, and have an analysis of your legal and financial situation. And we'll have and we'll both have better clarity of your issues and goals. And then we'll come up together with a blueprint on how to achieve the goals. And we'll know exactly at the end of that meeting how much it's going to, what the investment is going to be for that, get that plan in place. After our meeting, you need to decide to get started. And then we'll establish the plan to achieve the goals and prepare the documents. We'll meet with you a couple more times. We'll work on other tools and steps we need to get done. Again, if we're dealing with a chronic illness or aging issues that require assistance, we may want you to visit again with our care coordinator. Our meeting, this type of meeting, we usually charge $650 for, but because you've attended this today, it's free. So what's the catch? We've scheduled 6 spots available in the next 4 weeks. So to book your strategy session, call this number on the screen or complete the Survey Monkey. And again, don't worry about writing this down. We're going to send you a link. So my personal guarantee after that meeting is you're going to know more than you did before today. You'll have an analysis of what happens if you do nothing, and you will realize there are options available to guide and protect you and your family, which is most important, and your time's not going to be wasted. So to book your strategy session, call this number or complete the Survey Monkey link. That number is 877-325-8040. If you do, you're going to get a free booklet called A Guide to Alzheimer's Care that I wrote a few years back, and a written summary of our recommendation. Remember to call the number or complete the link. This is what you're going to be getting. And so I'm now going to turn it over to Emily. Emily, any questions that you have or comments?
I don't see any questions in the chat box right now, but I do want to encourage everyone to go ahead and put your questions in right now so we can get to them this morning. I do want to kindly remind everyone that you will receive that follow-up email that Randy mentioned that will contain the important items. We're actually recording this session, and so we'll provide that to you so you can share it with other family members, friends, colleagues, anyone that wasn't able to make this session today, or just so that way you can go back through and take notes on all of the really important topics and tips that Randy provided you this morning. The second thing the email contains is the SurveyMonkey link, and I did put that link in the chat box already for you to go ahead and complete. So just fill out that quick 2-minute survey where you'll receive the completely free strategy session or the free booklet or both as well. So go ahead and call our office at that phone number anytime if you have questions regarding that free strategy session and how it works and who to bring, or if you have any other questions. I don't see any additional questions coming through the chat box, but, oh, here we go. Randy, if a family doesn't have any assets or income other than Social Security and need assistance with the Medicaid application, do you know of any resources for them?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we could take a look at what's going on. The other option would be Hayes Legal Services. They now have a person, actually he's located in Junction City, but he does their Medicaid work.
Perfect,
So
Randy.
Legal Services of Kansas is your answer, yes.
Randy, what about driving if diagnosed with dementia?
Well, you know, I think that's one of the really hard conversations to have, particularly when it's, and this is a little bit sexist, but a little bit when it's a man, they giving up that freedom. But I mean, I see it with women as well. That's a real hard conversation. Sometimes it's an issue that needs to be addressed with the family physician, because in theory, not in theory, but in actuality, he can start the process that would revoke their license so they could not drive. Again, that's a really tough topic. For whatever reason, it seems like I'm getting more people willing to say, I don't need to drive. But I know a few years back, it was probably the hottest topic in our office, was trying to talk mom or dad into no longer driving. And sometimes it's just, hiding the keys is what has to be done. But it's difficult when it's a husband and wife, and obviously one of them's driving and one of them shouldn't be driving. And so that is a really tough conversation to have. So just because, to answer your question, just because you have dementia doesn't mean you can't drive. Because dementia comes in all different levels. So the Mr. Lundgren that I gave you the example of earlier has dementia, but he still knows enough to drive. So I hope that answers that question. There's not a black and white answer. Just because you have dementia doesn't mean you can't drive. Does the dementia impair your ability to drive safely is the guiding question.
Perfect. Thanks for addressing that, Randy. We have one more here. If someone is needing to apply for Medicaid in the next 6 months for assisted living costs and are wanting to protect the home and other accounts, that is still an option. Is that still an option even with the 5-year Medicaid look back?
Yeah, and again, it's going to be case specific. So some types of transfers are not, it's according to who you're trying to protect it from. So as an example, if it's a married couple, we have one alternative. If it's a single person, there's another alternative. If there are disabled children, there may be an alternative. But again, it's very case specific. The other thing I want you to be aware of is you have to be careful with assisted living facilities because not all of them will, not many of them do not accept Medicaid. Some of them do. Many of them, even with the ones that do accept Medicaid, require you to privately pay for a period of time before you would be eligible to apply for Medicaid. So the Medicaid rules are completely different for assisted living than they are for nursing homes.
Perfect. Randy, are there businesses that can be your POA if there are no children?
Yes.
Okay. And how would you find someone to do that for you?
Yeah, and I mean, we actually have a company out of Kansas City that we've used on some rare occasions. Our office will do it. We have used church members. I know one we had, the pastor was the healthcare power of attorney and somebody else in the church was the financial power of attorney. So that does come up. But again, that's something that we could talk to you about in the planning process.
Okay, well,
That's not as unusual a question as you think it is. So I don't want you to feel bad about that. That's not. I have I have families with children that their children would be the very last people they would appoint to be their power of attorney. So it's not that unusual a question.
Yes, those were great questions. Thank you, everyone. We are a few minutes over, so I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting. But if you think of any other questions, please feel free to email us, call us, fill out that SurveyMonkey link. That way we can help you. Thank you all for joining us this morning, and you'll get this recording later on this afternoon. And thank you, Randy, for providing the information with us today.
Thank you, everyone.